In the summer of 1999, the air in Colorado felt fresh and alive. The sun was warm, the sky was clear, and the mountains stood tall like old silent watchers. Emily Harper and Jacob Mills were a young couple in their early 20s. They had been dating for almost 2 years and were known to everyone as that couple who always smiled, held hands, and loved adventure. Emily worked part-time at a bookstore and was studying to become a teacher. She had short brown hair, always, wore her favorite backpack covered in patches, and loved to read about nature and survival skills. Jacob was taller, quiet, with a kind smile. He worked as a mechanic and spent weekends fixing up his old Jeep Cherokee. Together, they shared a deep love for the outdoors, hiking, camping, and exploring new trails. Nature made them feel free, alive, and closer to each other. On the morning of July 14, 1999, they left their small apartment in Colorado Springs with plans to hike through a part of the San Juan Mountains, a beautiful but wild area known for its deep forests, rocky slopes, and peaceful lakes. Emily had planned the route for weeks. She carried a printed map in a plastic case, and Jacob packed their tent, sleeping bags, food, and a small camera to capture the trip. Before they drove off, they told their families they'd be back in 2 days. Emily called her mom and said, "Don't worry, we'll be back Sunday night." Jacob left a note on his friend's windshield saying, "Gone hiking with Emily. Back soon." No one had any reason to worry. They stopped for gas at a small station near the town of Silverton. A security camera caught them smiling, buying snacks, and checking the map again. That was the last time anyone saw them. When Sunday came and went, their families started to worry. By Monday, calls to their phones went straight to voicemail. Jacob's parents tried to convince themselves that maybe they had just decided to camp a bit longer. Emily's mom kept calling her daughter's cell phone every hour, even when she knew it wouldn't ring. By Tuesday, they reported the couple missing. Search and rescue teams began looking right away. Helicopters flew over the mountains, volunteers walked miles of trail, and police dogs sniffed the woods. They found tire tracks that looked like Jacob's Jeep, but they disappeared near a rocky path that was hard to follow. The mountain was full of narrow turns, thick trees, and sudden cliffs. It was the kind of place where a person could be just 20 feet away, and no one would ever see or hear them. Days passed, then weeks. No tent, no backpack, no broken branch. Nothing. News spread quickly. Local TV stations showed Emily and Jacob's photos every night. Their families appeared on camera, pleading for help. "If anyone has seen them, please tell us," Emily's father said, his voice shaking. People across the state joined the search. Some even drove from other cities just to help. Hikers checked the trails. Locals offered their cabins. Still, nothing was found. After a month, the search was officially paused. Their families never accepted that. Emily's mother refused to believe they were just gone. She made posters, called newspapers, and even hired a private investigator who used drones to fly over parts of the forest. Jacob's sister started a website dedicated to their search, sharing any tiny clue that came in. People from across the country began sharing their story. But every tip led nowhere. The seasons changed. Snow covered the mountain paths. Hopes grew colder. By the end of the year, some people quietly began to think the worst, that the couple had either gotten lost and died from the cold, or that someone had hurt them. Rumors started. Some locals said maybe it was an accident. Others whispered darker things, like how that part of the mountains was dangerous and full of secrets. A year later, a park ranger found a torn map near a deep ravine. It looked like it had been there a while, faded and dirty. It had red pen markings like the kind Emily used, but they couldn't prove it was hers. They sent it to the families, who broke down when they saw it. Emily's mom said she was sure it was her daughter's, but it still wasn't enough. As the years passed, life moved on, but not for their families. Every summer, Emily's parents returned to the mountains. They'd walk the trails, leave flowers, and sometimes sit quietly in the woods, just listening. Jacob's brother learned how to hike and began searching new paths each year, refusing to give up. A few times, people reported seeing an old jeep deep in the woods, but it always turned out to be something else. An old cabin, a shadow, a log that looked like a vehicle. Their story faded from the news, replaced by new tragedies and new mysteries. But to the families, the silence hurt more than any answer. People started to forget, but the mountains didn't. They held the truth, buried somewhere between the trees and the rocks, waiting. Two people had gone in, full of hope, love, and excitement, and had never come out. And for 20 years, all anyone had were memories, unanswered questions, and a hole in their hearts that time couldn't fill. The story was far from over, but no one knew that yet. All they knew was that Emily and Jacob had vanished, and nothing would ever be the same again. For years after Emily and Jacob disappeared, their names still echoed in the quiet mountain towns. People who had never even met them remembered their photos, the young woman with a bright smile and the man with soft eyes who looked at her like she was his whole world. The mystery of what happened to them began to grow larger than their lives. It became one of those stories people whispered about at gas stations, around campfires, and in school hallways. But as time passed, something else grew too: doubt. The search had brought no real clues. No bodies, no tent, no backpack, not even the jeep. It was like the forest had opened up, swallowed them whole, and then sealed itself shut again. Some people in the town of Silverton had their own ideas. A few believed it was just an accident. "The mountains are dangerous," an old hiking guide said once. "One wrong step, and you're down a ravine so deep no one would ever find you." It was the simplest answer, and maybe the saddest one. But it also made sense to some. Others thought differently. There were whispers, stories older than Emily and Jacob, about people going missing in those mountains. A group of friends had vanished in the 80s during a snowstorm, and though their bodies were found later, one of them was never recovered. In the 60s, a Boy Scout troop reported strange lights in the sky. One boy said he saw a man watching them from a ridge, but when the scoutmaster went to check, no one was there. So when Emily and Jacob vanished, it wasn't just a tragedy. It was added to a strange pattern. Some people started talking about the Ridge Watcher, a name made up by hikers who joked nervously about being followed. Others said the area was cursed, or that it hid something the government didn't want people to find. Of course, not everyone believed those things, but when something terrible happens, and there are no answers, people start creating their own. Then came the more personal rumors. One theory was that Jacob and Emily had staged their disappearance, that maybe they had grown tired of their lives and wanted to start over somewhere far away. Maybe they crossed into Canada, one online forum user wrote, changed their names, started fresh. A few people even claimed to have seen a couple that looked like them in other towns, but none of those stories ever led to anything real. Others believed something darker. One rumor said Jacob had snapped, that he and Emily got into a fight, and he had hurt her, then run away or taken his own life. Another version reversed it. People wondered if Emily had harmed Jacob. These were cruel and painful ideas for their families, but the internet doesn't always care about feelings. The forums, the late-night radio shows, and the amateur detectives on message boards dug into every piece of their lives. They found old blog posts, yearbook quotes, even tried to read meaning into Jacob's last note to his friend. Gone hiking. With Emily. Back soon. Was back soon too confident? Was it hiding something? Emily's mother stopped reading the online stories after a while. "They don't know her," she would say, shaking her head. "They didn't see the way." She looked at those mountains. She loved the world too much to run away from it. Jacob's brother spent more time trying to fight the rumors than anything else. He replied to comments, wrote posts explaining who Jacob really was. He was the kind of guy who would fix a stranger's car for free. He loved Emily more than anything. He didn't hurt her. The families tried their best to keep hope alive. But even they had to admit that after 5 years, after 10 years, it felt like the world had moved on. People stopped talking about them. Their story became just another cold case in a dusty file cabinet. The police no longer had active leads. The hikers who once joined the searches had gone home, but the pain didn't leave. Emily's mom still set a place for her at the table every Thanksgiving. Jacob's dad kept the Jeep's old license plate in his garage, hanging on the wall like a memory he couldn't let go of. Every now and then, something small would happen that stirred things up again. Once, a hunter found a torn piece of fabric that looked like it belonged to a tent. He brought it in, but the color didn't match what they had taken. Another time, a hiker found bones near a dried-up riverbed, but they turned out to be from a deer. Each time hope flickered to life, and each time it was gently put out again. But even when nothing happened, people still talked in quiet voices. One night, almost 15 years after the disappearance, a man named Howard, who ran a small lodge near the mountains, told a story to a group of tourists sitting by his fireplace. He said he remembered seeing two people, young, tired, dirty, from a distance in the woods one morning around the time they went missing. They looked lost, but he had been chopping firewood and thought nothing of it. Later, when he saw the photos on the news, he wondered, could it have been them? By then, the area had changed. More people were moving into the mountain towns. Cell phone towers were being built. Roads were improved. But there were still parts of the forest that remained wild, untouched, and dangerous. Places where even Google Maps didn't go. The legend of Emily and Jacob became part of those woods. Hikers passed by the trailheads and sometimes left flowers on the signs. A few said they felt a strange presence when they hiked too far off trail, like someone was watching. Some believed it was just nerves. Others thought it was something else. In 2016, a small podcast featured their story. The host spoke with both families and even drove to Silverton. The podcast wasn't famous, but it brought their names back into the spotlight for a while. New listeners shared the episodes, and for a few weeks, the internet buzzed again. People on Reddit made maps, compared photos, and tried to solve the mystery like a game. But still, no answers. In early 2019, 20 years after they vanished, a new rumor started. A construction crew was scheduled to begin clearing a new forest, rode through an old logging trail. Some locals weren't happy about it. They said the forest should be left alone, but the government had approved the project, saying it was needed for fire control and emergency access. No one expected that the road work would finally shake something loose. Before that happened, though, everything still felt like silence. Like their story had become frozen in time. Emily's mom had turned older, her voice softer, but she still believed. She said she often dreamed of her daughter standing at the edge of the forest, smiling, holding out her hand. Jacob's brother had gotten married, had a child, and named him Jacob, too. Maybe he'll find the answer one day, he joked once, though his eyes were wet when he said it. Even the police had nearly stopped thinking about the case. It was filed under unsolved, presumed deceased. But in quiet moments, some of the old officers still looked at the map. They still wondered how two people could disappear so completely. And then, the machines came. Bulldozers, construction workers. The ground began to tremble, and deep beneath the earth, something waited to be found. In the early morning of August 2019, the forest was quiet except for the soft sound of birds and the rumbling of machines in the distance. A construction crew had been sent deep into the San Juan Mountains to widen an old Forest Service road. The project had been planned for over a year, but not everyone was happy about it. Locals, hikers, and even a few environmentalists said the forest should be left untouched. The area was too wild, too sacred, too full of stories. But the government needed the road. Fires had spread fast the year before, and this path would allow faster emergency access. So the crew got to work with chainsaws, bulldozers, and trucks. One morning, after a few weeks of clearing thick trees and removing old rocks, something strange happened. A bulldozer was pushing through a rocky slope near a sharp bend when the operator felt a sudden jolt, like the machine had hit something metal under the earth. At first he thought it was a large pipe, or maybe a buried fuel tank from the old logging days. He stepped out, wiped the sweat off his forehead, and called over a few workers. Together they began to clear the area with shovels, hands, and crowbars. Soon, the metal object began to take shape. It wasn't a pipe. It was larger, dark, rusted, covered in layers of dirt and leaves and time. It was a vehicle. They kept digging, slowly, carefully. The shape of the front grille came out first. Then the tires, flat, torn apart by years of pressure. A cracked headlight, a broken mirror. One of the workers stared at the old license plate. He didn't say a word at first, just stepped back slowly, because the plate read 998 LTN. Later, it would be confirmed by the police. That was the license plate on Jacob Mills's Jeep Cherokee. They had found it. The crew stood in silence. No one spoke, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Some of the men had lived nearby for years. They remembered the story of the young couple who vanished. And now, here it was, hidden beneath a small landslide, buried for 2 decades like a secret the mountain had been keeping. The construction was stopped immediately. Police and forensic teams were called. News spread quickly. Reporters arrived. Cameras were set up. But the area was closed off to the public. The vehicle had been wedged between rocks at a strange angle. The front of the Jeep was crushed slightly, as if it had rolled or slid downhill before getting caught. Inside, the scene was heartbreaking. On the passenger seat lay a torn jacket, faded and full of dirt. On the dashboard was a small, weather-damaged notebook. In the back were 2 decayed sleeping bags, an old cooler, and a broken camera. The camera was sealed inside a plastic bag, a waterproof case, the kind hikers use to protect their film. And in the front seat, and partially under the dashboard, were human remains. It took days for the forensics team to collect everything. Bones, fragments of clothing, small personal items, like a charm bracelet, a Swiss Army knife, and a cracked wristwatch that had stopped ticking long ago. DNA testing confirmed what most already guessed. The remains belonged to Emily Harper and Jacob Mills. After 20 years, the couple had finally been found. News outlets across the country picked up the story. Missing Colorado couple discovered after 20 years, read one headline. Others called it a tragic ending to a mysterious tale. But for the families, it was something else entirely. It was both pain and peace. Emily's mother said, through tears, "Now I know. Now I can visit her. She's not lost anymore." Jacob's brother held up a photo of the 2 of them from high school and said, "We never stopped looking." But as investigators continued to search through the items found in the Jeep, the story began to shift. Because among the dirt and rust, they found more than just bones and belongings. They found pieces of a puzzle. The small notebook was damaged, but some pages were still readable. Emily had written in it during the trip. Her handwriting was shaky, but clear in parts. She had described the trail, the weather, how happy she felt being alone in the woods with Jacob. But then the tone changed. One line read, "I think someone's following us." Another, "We saw a man on the ridge, just standing there, watching." And later, "Last night we heard footsteps near the tent. Jacob got up with the flashlight. He didn't see anyone, but something's wrong. I feel it." The entries stopped after that, but they told a chilling story. The couple hadn't just gotten lost. They had felt like they were being watched, followed. And then there was the camera. The film was old, but experts worked carefully to develop it. The first few photos were what everyone expected. Emily and Jacob smiling at the trailhead, standing beside their tent, cooking over a campfire. There were shots of trees, rivers, and one of Emily pretending to chase a chipmunk. But then, toward the end of the roll, there was a photo that made the hairs on the back of the detective's neck stand up. It was taken at dusk. The lighting was poor. The image was slightly blurred, but in the distance, halfway behind a tree on a ridge, was a figure. A man. He was too far to see clearly, but he wasn't hiking. He wasn't moving. He was just standing, watching. No one could identify him. The photo was sent through facial recognition programs, but the distance made it impossible to get a clear match. Investigators asked the public for help. Hundreds of tips came in, but none led to answers. The photo raised more questions than it answered. Who was he? Why was he watching? Did he have something to do with what happened? Police began looking back. Through old files. They searched for any known criminals, hermits, or survivalists who lived near that area in the late 1990s. One name kept coming up. A man named Earl Jensen, a former soldier who had lived alone in a cabin about 6 miles from where the Jeep was found. He was known to be quiet, sometimes aggressive with strangers, and had a history of mental illness. He disappeared in 2008 and was later found dead from natural causes in a different part of the state. Could he have been the man in the photo? No, one knew for sure. But locals remembered stories about Earl. They said he didn't like people near his land, that he used to track hikers from a distance, just to make sure they weren't trouble. Investigators searched what was left of his old cabin. They found nothing unusual, no trace of Emily or Jacob. But one retired ranger said something that stayed in people's minds. He said, "There were things about Earl we never understood. He knew the land better than anyone. If he wanted to follow someone and not be seen, he could do it. Still, there was no hard evidence to say Earl was involved. Maybe the couple had seen someone else. Maybe they got scared and rushed to leave. Maybe they lost control of the Jeep on the rocky road and crashed. That could explain how it ended up buried after a small landslide. But it didn't explain everything. Why hadn't they called for help? Why? Was the Jeep found so far off the marked trail? Why was Emily writing about being watched? Too many questions. Not enough answers. The case was considered closed. But the mystery wasn't. The site where the Jeep was found was turned into a small memorial. A wooden sign with their names. A photo of them smiling. People still came, left flowers, even candles. Hikers now passed by quietly, some taking off, their hats out of respect. Their story had changed forever. They weren't just the couple who vanished. They were something more. Proof that some secrets do come back, even after 2 decades. Emily and Jacob had finally been brought home. But the forest still held shadows. And some people believed it always would. The forest looked peaceful again, as if nothing had happened. The wind moved gently through the trees, and the sun came through the leaves in golden patches. But deep inside the hearts of the people who lived nearby, and especially inside the hearts of Emily and Jacob's families, there was a storm of emotions. The discovery of the Jeep, the remains, the notebook, and the old camera had shaken everything. The truth had come out, yes, but along with it came new questions. Uncomfortable questions. Questions that still had no answers. Emily's mother visited the crash site a few weeks after it was opened to the families. She stood there quietly, holding a photo of her daughter. She touched the wooden sign with Emily and Jacob's names carved into it. Her eyes were wet. She whispered, "I knew you were here. I could feel it." Jacob's brother came too. He stared at the ground and said, "I thought finding them would help." But it just opened a new mystery. They weren't wrong. Police had closed the case officially, calling it a tragic accident. The Jeep had likely slid off the road after a storm, got buried in a landslide, and was hidden for 20 years. But Emily's journal told a different story. And that photo, the one with the strange figure on the ridge, refused to leave people's minds. It was passed around on the internet, zoomed in, brightened, and studied by thousands of people. But no one could say for sure who the man was, or even if it was a man at all. Some people said the figure looked too tall. Others thought it looked like it had no face. Wild theories spread, everything from a forest hermit to a ghost, to something not human at all. Most people thought those ideas were silly, but some believed. Especially when the rest of the film was developed and the last few photos came to light. One of the final pictures taken on that camera showed Jacob standing beside a tree, smiling. Behind him, far in the distance, was what looked like the same figure again. Not clear, just the shape of someone standing still. And the last photo, partly damaged and dark, showed something truly strange. It was taken at night. The flash had lit up a small area in the forest. The photo was blurry, shaky, but in the corner there were two small lights, round and bright, almost like eyes, too far apart for an animal, and too low to the ground for a person. No one could explain it. The original camera was examined carefully. Experts confirmed the photos had not been edited or tampered with. The damage came from time and weather, not tricks. These were real pictures, taken by Emily or Jacob themselves, just days, or maybe hours, before they died. Police stayed quiet about these last photos, but someone leaked them. Soon they were online, and people started digging again. A new wave of internet detectives came forward, this time including digital experts, former rangers, and even survivalists. Everyone had a theory. One theory was simple. Someone was in the woods. A man, maybe even a local who didn't want strangers near his land. Maybe he scared the couple enough to make them panic and try to leave quickly. That might explain why the Jeep was found off the main road. Maybe they were trying to escape, took a wrong turn, and the Jeep slipped. That theory made sense to some, but others believed it went deeper. A user on a hiking forum wrote a long post claiming that the area where the Jeep was found had a history of strange disappearances. Not just Emily and Jacob. He listed at least 6 other names from the past. 30 years. People who vanished while hiking in the same part of the San Juan Mountains. Some were found. Some weren't. One woman, in 2003, had gone hiking alone. Her backpack was found 3 weeks later, but her body never was. Her last phone message, left with a friend, said, "I think I saw someone watching me. Twice now." Another case in 1991 involved 3 friends who went on a fishing trip and never returned. Their boat was found upside down in a lake, but no signs of them. No struggle. No footprints. Nothing. Was this all just coincidence? Some thought yes. Others weren't so sure. One local man named Roy Jensen came forward on a local podcast. He claimed he had once seen something strange in the same woods, not far from where the Jeep was found. This was years earlier in the late 90s. Roy said he had been walking back from checking his hunting traps when he saw a tall figure standing perfectly still behind a tree. He thought it was a hiker at first, but then it moved, too quickly, too silently. "It wasn't right," he said. "It didn't make noise, even on dry leaves. I just turned around and left." Most people didn't take Roy seriously, but others said maybe it was time to listen to the strange stories. Maybe there was something out there in those woods that people had been ignoring. Then, something unexpected happened. Jacob's old backpack was found. Not in the Jeep, not even near the crash site, but almost a mile away, deep in the trees, under a fallen log. A hiker named Megan was walking a little used trail when her dog started sniffing at something in the ground. She pulled away the leaves and saw a torn strap. She dug carefully and uncovered an old hiking bag, moldy and faded. Inside were a few items: a compass, a broken flashlight, a water bottle, and a small notebook. Not Emily's notebook. This one was Jacob's. The cover was almost gone, but a few pages had survived inside, protected from the rain. And what they said changed everything again. Jacob's notes were short, scattered thoughts. But one part stood out. He had written, "Saw him again, on the ridge. He doesn't move, just watches. Emily thinks we should turn back. I agree." Then another line. "Last night something touched the tent. No animal makes that sound. Like a whisper." And the last clear entry. "If we don't make it, tell our families we loved them. This isn't a normal hike. Something is wrong here. Very wrong." That entry was dated just one day before the crash. Investigators were stunned. It meant that Jacob and Emily were scared enough to believe they might not survive. It also suggested they knew they were being followed, but followed by who or what? Some thought maybe they were being stalked by a person. Maybe someone who lived off the grid, didn't want people nearby, and had scared them badly. But again, no one had been arrested. No one even found. And that's what kept the story alive, because no matter how much evidence came in, the ending still didn't feel complete. The crash explained part of the story, but not the fear, not the strange lights, not the figure on the ridge, and not the fact that Jacob's backpack was found so far from the Jeep. Had he tried to run for help? Was Emily injured and he left to get help but never made it back? Or was something, or someone, deliberately separating them? That last idea haunted people. The families tried their best to move forward. Emily's mother started a small foundation in her daughter's name to help search for other missing hikers. Jacob's brother spoke at outdoor safety events, warning people about staying on marked trails and never hiking without emergency gear. But in their eyes, you could still see it, the pain of not knowing everything. Sometimes closure isn't just about finding the bodies. It's about understanding what happened, why it happened, and in this case, they never fully did. The Jeep stayed where it was for a while, before being carefully removed by a team that treated it like a historical artifact. It was taken to a storage facility for further study, but nothing new came from it. The forest grew back slowly around the crash site. Grass returned. Trees leaned toward the sunlight. But people who visited said the place still felt strange. Too quiet. Too still. Some said they could hear whispers if they stood there long enough. Others laughed at that idea. But even those who didn't believe in ghosts agreed on one thing. Something happened out there. Something that left two smart, kind, happy young people so terrified that they tried to escape in the middle of nowhere. Something that made Jacob write goodbye notes. Something that no one could fully explain, even now. And whatever it was still out there, because even after 20 years, it had never been found. The years passed slowly, like the quiet movement of clouds across a mountain sky. Emily and Jacob's story had spread far beyond the borders of their small town. People all over the country knew their names. Some spoke about them with sadness, others with curiosity. A few turned their story into books, documentaries, and even online theories. But for the families, the story was not entertainment. It was a wound that healed only part way. In 2021, 2 years after the discovery of the Jeep, Emily's younger sister, Claire, returned to the site. She had been just 13 when Emily vanished. Now she was in her 30s, and her eyes held a quiet strength. She didn't come with cameras or news people. She came alone, with a single flower in her hand, and her sister's favorite song playing in her headphones. She sat on a rock near the old memorial sign. For a long time she didn't speak. Then she whispered, "You were brave, Em. I wish I could have been with you." Claire had spent years trying to make sense of what happened. She had read all the reports, talked to detectives, and even studied mountain survival books. She learned how to read maps and understand trail patterns. But nothing ever made the fear in Emily's journal go away. That fear was real. Claire wanted to know what had caused it. One day, she reached out to a man named Paul Granger, a retired forest ranger who had worked in the San Juan Mountains during the late 1990s. He was in his 70s now and living in a small cabin just outside Durango. Claire visited him on a cool spring afternoon. Paul welcomed her with tea and sat on his wooden porch, watching the wind play with the trees. "I remember when they went missing," he said. "Whole town was torn up about it. Good kids, too." Claire showed him the journal pages. The photo with the figure on the ridge. Jacob's final notes. Paul looked through everything slowly, carefully. When he finished, he sighed and leaned back. "You want my honest answer?" he asked. Claire nodded. "I don't think it was just a crash," Paul said. "I think something scared them." Bad. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "Do you think someone was following them?" Paul was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I can't say for sure, but I do know this. There are places in those woods where the map stops, making sense. Places where your compass doesn't work. I've seen it myself. More than once." Claire frowned. "You mean, like magnetic fields or something?" "Maybe," Paul said. "Or maybe something older. Some parts of that forest don't want people in them." It sounded strange, but Claire didn't laugh. She believed him. Paul told her about an old legend shared by native tribes who lived in the mountains long before any towns were built. They spoke of a spirit, a watcher of the forest, who would appear to people who went too deep or stayed too long. Some saw it as a man, others as a shadow with no face. It never spoke, never chased, just watched. But those who saw it often went missing or came back different, quiet, changed. Claire had never heard that before. Paul continued, "Could be just stories, or maybe something real. All I know is, the forest doesn't always play fair." After that meeting, Claire became even more determined. She joined a group of experienced hikers and researchers who explored missing persons cases in wilderness areas. They used GPS, drones, heat sensors, and satellite images to try to find clues in old unsolved cases. They called themselves the Trail Watch. They returned to the area where Emily and Jacob's Jeep had been found. They mapped every trail, every old logging road, and every possible escape route. One of the team members, a tracker named Luis, found something strange. Almost. A mile from the crash site, hidden under moss and brush, he found an old boot. It was worn out and covered in dirt. But when cleaned, it matched the kind Jacob had been wearing. More surprising was what lay near the boot, a carved symbol on a rock. It was a circle, with a line through it, and an eye in the center. It didn't match any hiker mark, park ranger symbol, or known trail sign. But Luis had seen something similar before, in another case involving a missing person in Oregon. He called it the Watcher's Mark. No one could explain what it meant, but now it had shown up twice, in two separate cases of hikers who vanished under strange circumstances. Claire felt chills when she saw it. She began looking into other cases where people had reported being followed, or feeling watched, or seeing strange figures in the woods. There were more than she expected. A man in Utah in 2007 had recorded his own voice on a tape recorder whispering, "It's behind the trees. I can't see it, but I know it's there." His body was never found. A woman in Montana wrote in her journal, "It's not a man. It just looks like one." She vanished 3 days later. Could it all be connected? Could Emily and Jacob have come across something that many others had also seen? The truth was, no one knew. But the patterns were hard to ignore. Claire went public with her findings. She gave interviews, started a blog, and worked with other families of missing hikers. She didn't try to solve the mystery. She just wanted the world to understand that strange things happened in the wild, and that sometimes the answers didn't fit neatly in a police report. Her blog gained attention. Soon she was contacted by a woman named Sarah, who claimed to have seen the figure herself just 6 months earlier, near the same trailhead Emily and Jacob had taken. Sarah had been on a solo hike when she saw someone watching her from a ridge. She called out. No answer. She said she felt an overwhelming sense of fear. Not panic, something deeper. She turned back immediately and refused to hike alone again. Claire asked her to describe the figure. Sarah said, "It was too still, like a statue, but I swear, it was breathing." Others came forward too. Most were dismissed. But some stories matched details Claire knew were never made public, like the sound of whispering at night, or the strange feeling of walking in circles, even with a map. Claire started to believe that something real, something unknown, was hiding in the vast silence of the mountains. Still, she never claimed to know exactly what happened to her sister. She always said the same thing. They were good people, brave people, and they didn't die because they were careless. They died because something out there made sure they couldn't leave. In 2024, on the 25th anniversary of Emily and Jacob's disappearance, their families held a memorial service at the crash site. Dozens of people came, friends, hikers, even strangers who had followed the story for years. They lit candles, placed photos, some played music, others simply stood in silence. Claire gave a short speech. She said, "Emily and Jacob were full of life. They loved nature. They trusted the world. They wanted adventure. They didn't expect to meet something they couldn't explain. But they faced it together. And even in their final moments, they left behind a message. That something was wrong. That something was there." She paused. "And maybe," she continued, "that message wasn't just for us. Maybe it was a warning." After the service, as the sun dipped behind the mountain peaks and the shadows grew long, one of the hikers thought he saw someone standing on a far ridge, half hidden behind a tree. When he looked again, the figure was gone. He didn't tell anyone, but later he wrote in his journal, "It was watching." The mystery of Emily Harper and Jacob Mills may never be fully solved. Maybe it wasn't meant to be, but their story continues to live. Through every camper who checks behind the trees before sleeping, through every hiker who suddenly feels eyes on their back, and through every quiet breeze that passes through the forest, carrying with it a whisper of something old, something waiting, something still there. And though the trees grow tall and the trails go quiet, the mountain remembers, always.